Twin Peaks is one of the most influential television shows of all time. It ran for 2 seasons in the early 1990s and was created by David Lynch and Mark Frost. The setup of the show, and the franchise it eventually spawned, is the mysterious death of Laura Palmer. Over the 2 years in which it aired, audiences would slowly learn more week to week of the circumstances surrounding her death, eagerly awaiting the reveal of who killed Laura Palmer.
Since you are watching us, chances are you watched ABC's program Twin Peaks tonight, and you probably wonder who killed Laura Palmer.
In many ways, Laura Palmer is the crux of the entire Twin Peaks mythos. We open the entire series on the discovery of her lifeless body, wrapped in plastic. And over the remainder of the iconic season premiere, we are treated to a colourful cast of characters, each with their own connections to Laura. The show was wrapped up due to its premature cancellation, but was left on a satisfying, if ambiguous, note. The killer had been revealed, the day had been saved, and doors had been opened to potential new mysteries, which would eventually be explored in a 2017 revival. But there was a key element missing from the original television show. So much was discovered about the town Laura lived in, the people she affected, and the friends and lovers she grew connections with. We'd learned so much about Laura, but only through the lens of how she related to other people in the show, meaning we never truly got to understand who Laura was. She was the hook for the show, but never a character in her own right. This all changed with the release of David Lynch's prequel film, Twin Peaks Fire Walk With Me, in 1992. I wish to talk about how this film forever impacted the legacy of Laura Palmer by finally taking a peek behind the curtains. Curtains are a common motif seen across Lynch's expansive career, and they are often used to symbolise the unknown. They add a sense of mystery to their surroundings that entices the characters as much as it does the audience. And I think the key to truly understanding Lynch's obsession with these common, everyday items is by looking at his own personal favourite films. He has stated on numerous occasions his infatuation with the works of renowned filmmakers such as Fellini, Hitchcock, Tati, and Stanley Kubrick. And it is not hard to see how these artists have shaped his body of work, as many thematic parallels can be drawn between the films of Lynch and the prior mentioned directors. Although, one film that stands out as arguably the most vivid and commonly discussed source of inspiration is Victor Fleming's seminal 1939 masterpiece, The Wizard of Oz. A moment I want to highlight is significant for what Lynch does with Fire Walk With Me and his films as a whole happens towards the end of The Wizard of Oz. The moment in question sees the main characters finally reach their destination. They are able to speak to the titular Wizard of Oz and are initially met with an overbearing display of mysticism and wonder. However, when Dorothy's dog Toto wanders to a small booth at the edge of the wizard's room, he pulls back the curtains that hide the wizard's true secret. This wizard is simply a man who masks his human nature with theatrics and puts on a show for his subjects. By seeing the inner workings of the wizard's operation, so much is revealed about the idea of a facade. What once appeared supernatural and otherworldly actually hides a grounded human reality. But how does this tie into Lynch's films? Well, if we take the pulling back of the curtain as a metaphor, then it fits quite nicely into how David Lynch uses curtains as a motif across his filmography. While the use of curtains in his scene from The Wizard of Oz is more literal, Lynch's ever-present drapes are more symbolic. His films are known for their ambiguity, their mystery, and their apparent inability to explain themselves. But I believe if you look no further than this scene in The Wizard of Oz, a lot of his films begin to make more sense. The intricacies of the supernatural elements of David Lynch's movie worlds are not exactly what matters. What is important is to recognise that these curtains, and by extension, all of the supernatural happenings in his work, are used as a way to mask the human qualities of his stories. So, most importantly, how does this fit in with Twin Peaks Fire Walk With Me? Well, I would argue that out of all of Lynch's films, the allegory of curtains acting as a mask for inherent humanity is operating at the highest degree in Fire Walk With Me. Because we already know what happened to Laura, as well as who killed her, we finally get to see Laura as less of a symbol of death, instead getting to spend a week with her while she is alive. With this, we see the daily torment she endured in her final years of life. It is essential to note that prior to the release of this film, we only really knew Laura as the dead girl and as the perfect homecoming queen, whose image was supposedly summarised in one iconic photograph, a picture of Laura that is seen all over the Twin Peaks series. The recurrent use of this photo is significant because it is less a portrait of Laura and more a portrait of the typical all-American sweetheart. Young, beautiful, passionate, full of promise and well regarded by all. After Laura dies, this is the image that is most commonly used to commemorate her. But this is not who Laura was. This is instead the mask that Laura put up while she was alive and even after death has become her legacy within the town. A glorified image that reveals nothing of Laura's true suffering. One of the most iconic pieces of imagery from Lynch's filmography is the Red Room, also known as the Black Lodge, first introduced in episode 3 of Twin Peaks' first season. While its true inner workings remain a mystery, it is safe to assume that the Red Room is a place beyond space, time and tangibility, composed of and surrounded by extreme negative energy. We see numerous evil entities from the Twin Peaks franchise, as well as leading characters such as Laura and Dale Cooper pass through this space. Many would theorise that the Red Room is a centre for evil and a home to the supernatural and the unexplained. Some even claim that it is a depiction of some sort of hell, or at the very least, purgatory. But beyond the iconic zigzag floor patterns, the sparse furniture, and marble busts that create an uneasy liminal space for some of the franchise's most surreal moments to take place, what is another of the most distinct visual features of the Red Room? The curtains. I believe it is no mistake that Lynch created one of his most unnerving and borderline indescribable fictional settings using curtains. Bob, the evil entity that murdered Laura, is frequently seen in the Red Room. Before her murder, Bob spent years sexually abusing Laura, degrading her from a young age, exposing her to the dark side of the world from an incredibly early point in her life. Laura spent years suffering in silence, spending the most fundamental stages of her maturity believing that the abuse she was subjected to was the norm. All the while, the town she lived in knew nothing of what was happening to her, instead putting her on a pedestal and mischaracterising her as the aforementioned homecoming queen, completely dehumanising her and boxing her into a caricature that restricted her ability to speak out in the process. Although we as the audience can easily relate Bob to the Red Room, it can be questioned if either Bob or the Red Room are even real. Many have hypothesised that they are both simply manifestations of the darkness that exists in the world. As Albert Rosenfield suggests in the original series,
maybe that's all Bob is. The evil that men do.
This would make sense with the curtains theory that I have already established. We know that Bob is an entity, and he killed Laura Palmer by possessing the body of another, who I will not disclose the identity of due to spoilers. So, Bob is literally and figuratively the mask for the human evil that Laura is a victim of. But how does that tie in with the themes of Fire Walk With Me? The film is about hidden suffering and a young girl's alienation due to years of sexual assault. But if we analyse Laura's story, it can be argued that Bob is her manifestation. The supernatural elements of the franchise can be interpreted as metaphors for real human experiences. Perhaps Laura manifests Bob because pulling that curtain over the reality of her true abuser is a much easier way to avoid the actuality of what she experiences. People, both in the real world and in the fictional universe of Twin Peaks, find it much easier to digest themes of abuse if a curtain is drawn and it is depicted under the guise of the supernatural, thus avoiding the harsh truth that abuse is real and happens every day, even when people put on a mask of their own and pretend that it is not happening. In the same way that all horror is an allegory for practical human fears and anxieties, Fire Walk With Me shows Laura attempting to rationalise the horror of her situation by actively irrationalising it. Because it is simply easy to pretend that what she is going through is more in line with a ghost story or a possession than accepting her truth. She finds it easy to digest human horrors by making them inhuman. I believe that this way of looking at the film aligns with readings of Fire Walk With Me as an intricately feminist piece. It is an unflinching but never uncaring view on sexual abuse, violence, drug misuse, and the dark side of the archetypal American suburbia and the archetypal American girl. This motif of masks and curtains can be applied to much of the film, including many elements not suggested in this video. Laura's house is a mask. It's the ideal American home and personifies the wholesome family image that hides the reality of what happens behind closed doors, which is obscured by the curtains in its windows. Laura's photograph is a mask. It is what we want to see, what the townsfolk of Twin Peaks want to believe, and it is what Laura wants us to perceive of her. People would rather believe everything is fine, so we bury our heads in the sand and draw curtains over the truth to keep that truth in the dark, and purposely shroud it in mystery. During Laura's funeral scene in season 1 of the original show, Bobby Briggs, Laura's boyfriend, questions whether he and the town could have done more. He questions how much people really knew and if they just found it easy to ignore and mask Laura's pain behind her prom queen facade. Although, because Twin Peaks Fire Walk With Me finally shows Laura as a living person and not just an image frozen in time, her legacy could finally be reclaimed and rewritten. By bridging the worlds of the natural and supernatural in its depictions of abuse, Laura's story acts as a warning that crosses over from the film world to ours. Even though Laura died and she was never able to speak out about what her life was genuinely like, she lives on in the fandom and the hearts of thousands of people who have been touched by her story of lost innocence. Despite the doom and gloom of the 2.5 hours preceding it, the film's ending is a hopeful one. After finally dying at the hands of Bob, we see Laura in the Red Room. As Dale Cooper appears and comforts her, an angel materialises, sending Laura into hysteria as she bursts into tears of joy. I interpret this as Laura's realisation of her strength and the release of the pain that dominated her life. She resisted her demons and chose to die as a martyr for young women around the world rather than being consumed by darkness, ending the cyclical violence she had forcibly been made a victim of. It is a twisted ending in the sense that it's a very emotionally complex one, and its effects can be clearly seen in how women in the Twin Peaks fandom have since shared their own stories and what Laura means to them. I cannot recommend Courtenay Stallings' incredible book, Laura's Ghost, Women Speak About Twin Peaks, enough. The book is a collection of interviews, essays and discussions surrounding how people have been affected by Laura Palmer. The book just proves that Laura's end is more than just a death. It is a birth in many ways, a catalyst for conversations that were not frequently had in the early 1990s, and even now people struggle to discuss. It is no wonder that the film's infamous 1992 premiere at the Cannes Film Festival was so disastrous, with people citing it as too dark or too upsetting. It is understandably uncomfortable to reconcile with the fact that the evil entities we initially learned about in the Twin Peaks series have such dark connotations that reflect the experiences of so many young girls. But as of 2024, the film has slowly received a large critical reappraisal, a hopeful sign that times are changing and people are finally open to sharing experiences of abuse, depression, and the indescribable desire to escape the pain of living through death. Twin Peaks Fire Walk With Me finally acknowledged the curtains we use as a veil for the underbelly of the human condition in a way the TV series never could. And not only is that thanks to David Lynch, whose empathetic masterpiece sensitively shed a light on these topics, but to the works and words of many others, these being just a small few. Jennifer Lynch, the author of The Secret Diary of Laura Palmer, a book that details the darker elements of Laura's life, written from Laura's perspective as a way to console young girls who did not know how to rationalise what they were going through. This book was released before Fire Walk With Me and was evidently a considerable influence on how her father, David Lynch, handled Laura's story in that film. Courtenay Stallings, the previously mentioned author whose incredible book is a testament to and love letter for the power of community and shared experience. By extension, all the incredible women and men who were brave enough to share their experiences in that book and on online Twin Peaks fan forums. And of course, Cheryl Lee, who took on the insurmountable task of portraying Laura and gracefully carried the emotional weight of channeling the difficult experiences that so many had suffered through. She brought Laura to life with an unflinching, fearless sophistication, and a performance that deserves to be talked about among the greatest of all time. And not only that, but in the years since the release of Fire Walk With Me, Cheryl has talked to many survivors who were inspired by what she was able to do with her powerful performance. All of these contributors and many more are the ones who keep Laura alive. They have gone towards lifting the mask that society puts over these everyday tragedies. Hopefully, Laura's story is one that will continue to adapt and speak to newer generations, helping to increasingly peel back the layers and expose harsh realities so that more young people can find strength in telling their stories and comfort in knowing that they're not alone. With fans and survivors keeping this film alive in the modern era, perhaps society can slowly learn to pull back the curtain on the real horrors of our world, and we can learn to speak and heal together.